So that when you look into the US Constitution, you see that, for instance, law and equity are combined. They're no longer separate. And that the executive function is separate from the courts. They still have the executive appointing members of the court, but the actual functions of the court are separate. The actual functions of the Senate and the House are separate. And part of that dealt with something that I don't want to get into now. It goes back to this check and balance against the monarch. And a lot of that arose during the time of Cromwell's revolution, when that period of time when there was no monarchy. But what I was talking about essentially, and what I think happened was with capitalism, was that it reached its zenith. It went as far as it was capable of going, and people tried to take it and turn it into something that it was just never designed to do or accomplish. And that was, they tried to make it serve as some sort of means that was going to provide for the people, which is something that it was never really intended to do. And I think, well, I don't think, I'm certain, I'm absolutely certain beyond any conceivable doubt that anything new has to arise from individual sovereignty. It cannot arise from a government representing business interests, commercial interests, landed interests. All of those things, those entities, the corporations, and so on and so forth, have rights that have to be and deserve to be enforced. Like, for instance, we did away with certain aspects of feudalism. There's no titles of nobility and things like that as expressed in the Constitution. But we didn't throw away property rights, the right to own property, the rights that are coincident to the property owner. And there's no reason why we should throw those away. It's the same as commercial rights. There's no reason why contract rights, transactional rights, or anything like that should be thrown away. But if you look at this whole thing, the law is a snapshot through the conservative eye, small c conservative eye. It appears that what you have is you have a system of law that's based on property rights, the rights of things, and this other part of the law that's based on commercial rights and transactional rights and things like that, which are expressed in the US Constitution. But the actual rights of people outside of property and outside of commercialism are seldom addressed. And most of the rights that we have in those regards are mentioned to some degree by amendments to the Constitution and other degrees in the original document, but they've largely been developed by rules in court cases and so on. And they've assumed less of a significance than they ought to. And I think the reason of that is it's an evolutionary step. You had the landed gentry, and then this came to be assimilated along with capitalists and commercial rights. And what we need now is we need to allow those to continue, but we have to put the people first. And it seems like, well, that doesn't really accomplish anything, but actually it does. And one of the reasons I'm in favor of abolishing the 11th Amendment is because you have to get rid of this idea that the states are sovereign. Because if a state is going to fuck with us as individuals, then we should have the right to sue that state And right now, the 11th Amendment, the way that it's interpreted by the courts, we're not allowed to sue a state. We could sue an officer, but we can't get any money from it. We can't get any money from the state. If the state does us wrong, then we ought to be able to sue them. The 11th Amendment prevents that from happening. So I am very much in favor of abolishing the 11th Amendment. It's something that should never occurred in the first place. I don't recall what the exact history of it is, but it was something, a gaggle of slave owners were trying to hide their assets in a state or something like that, and the state was purportedly had some sort of I don't know. I'd have to research it. But it doesn't really have any sort of present purpose. It has no real functionality in anything that it's in modern times, except this idea that of state sovereignty, that people are subjects rather than being citizens, rather than being individual sovereigns, this idea that we're subjects of the state. And the fact of the matter is that sovereignty was already defined as in the United States. Everything that I've discussed in terms of the idea of the authority coming from the people rather than God, rather than divine rights and things like that, this was already defined in a case called Chisholm v. Georgia, where one of the founding fathers, John Jay, one of the founding fathers of the Federalist Party also, one of the authors in the Federalist Papers, coined the phrase, "We are sovereigns without subjects." And this was unanimously agreed upon by the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's not changed. The 11th Amendment does not change that. In fact, if you don't believe me, ask me and I'll provide court citations and cases where the court repeats that. So this is one of the things that really has to be clarified. In order to progress beyond where we are right now, this is something that has to be done, and it'll be difficult. People will fight against it. Conservatives will fight against it. But the landed gentry, they did the same thing with capitalists. When the commercial interests arose, the landed gentry opposed them. When the commercial interests set forth to charter a bank, a central bank, to do the business of government, the landed gentry opposed them, saying that it was a merchant leech conspiracy. So you'll have this sort of thing, but it is absolutely essential that in order for us to take back our republic, in other words, the people that are going to represent us at the government are people that are going to represent us rather than representing commercial interests or landed interests. They have to represent the people first. So it's absolutely essential that if we're going to go to the next step, if we're going to add ourselves, you know, if we're going to escape from serfdom and indentured servitude, and having to, you know, our only escape being businessmen or Wall Street traders or whatever. I mean, there's just people that don't do that. There's people that deserve better than that. There's artists, artisans, all sorts of people that are not cut out to be laborers or not cut out to be business people or traders and things like that, that have equal rights just like everyone else has. But unfortunately, this capitalist system, if you want to call it that, does not provide for those people. And all that we have at the present time aside from that is the government. And under this present arrangement, when we try to ask for some sort of reparation, like, for instance, who could deny that the earth is our source for sustenance? We cannot live without the earth. The earth is what provides water. The earth is what provides food. All of the food that we eat comes from the earth. It doesn't come from outer space or anywhere else like that. But if we surrender our ability to have earth, to provide for ourselves sustenance, and we do it in exchange for a manufacturing job, to live in a little barracks type community, and people profit by this and claim a right to profit by this, then I claim a right that reparation is due to me, because I no longer have the power, I no longer have the access to the land to support my sustenance. I have to somehow surrender myself to the rules of this commercial society in order to get money, in order to survive, in order to even drink water. You know, the government, local government provides water much cheaper than, you know, I mean, stop and figure it out. Look at your water bill. If you're a property owner, look at your water bill from your local municipality and compare it to how much bottled water costs. I mean, if you could ever imagine having to take a bath with bottled water, use it to wash dishes and things like that, I mean, you'd have to be a millionaire in order to in order just to afford water. And if you allow private interests to provide that to you, rather than the government providing it to you, you're not going to be able to afford it. And those are the things you have to go down a list and look at those things and compare what the government is capable of doing, what they might do, and so on and so forth, and compare it to how the private sector does it. You know? And there's other aspects of this too that, for instance, a recent blog of mine touched upon mortgages, and I saw a program tonight that apparently the Republicans are now conceding the fact that you know, that mortgages were based on nothing, that there was no capital, that there was no reserve or government securities or anything, that some of these mortgages were just based upon private credit creation, and there was nothing there. It didn't exist. It was just a fiction. Well, this thing has gone all through the entire economy, because if there's another way of looking at this too. How much do the various parts of a house cost, and why do they cost as much as they do? You know, and when you put them all together, what is the total value of the house? You know, so when you talk about inflated housing prices or inflated mortgage prices or resale prices or whatever, you have to also look at the component parts of what is in this property, why it costs much, what is its inherent value. You know, if you put all of the pieces together or take them all apart, how much is it actually worth? You know? So I think that those things occur because people have tried to take commercialism and capitalism and have stretched it to a point where it's just incapable of providing for these things. And that I'm sorry to say this, but Marx was correct, that socialism is inevitable, that what is going to occur, and we're at that point now, is that people are going to assume power, and they're going to, well, actually reclaim power that's already ours, assert ourselves, and use our government to provide the things that we need. And I think the best way to start is to have the government provide subsistence to every man, woman, and child. And what I mean by subsistence is water, food, clothing, and shelter. Now, if you don't want to take it, you know, because you don't want to have a government handout, that's fine. But my position is that's all we're going to do. We're going to give you that. If you want more, get